Have you ever watched a tutorial to create a character like this and it just moved
Way too fast?
Well, in this tutorial, we're going to try and move slow in real time so that you can follow along. I also have the keyboard shortcuts on the screen so that you can follow along with those if you don't know the shortcuts by heart. I've also included a reference file in the description below so that you can use that as a reference for this character. And then I've updated my crafty asset sample pack, which is free, with this cotton fabric so that if you want to apply the same fabric look to your character, you can do that as well. I'll also have these project files up on my Patreon where I also do video walkthroughs of my projects as well. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive in and start creating this character. So first things first, you're going to want to go ahead and download the reference image in the description below. And if you come here to the image tab after dragging it into the viewport, you can adjust the opacity. I like to set mine around 0.15 and I set the depth at the front so it's always in front of the model. Next up, let's add Shift-A to add a cube, and we'll hit Control-3 to add a subdivision to that cube, and we're just going to use GZ to move that up on the axis. I'm just going to scale this up a tiny bit in edit mode here until I get it to match that reference photo there. Then I'm going to search for Convert to Mesh, which will apply the subdivision modifier, switch to Sculpt mode here, and I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that the mirror axis is on, and I'm going to use the grab mode. You can adjust the brush here with the F node, and then what we're going to do is go ahead and grab the corners of these faces and begin pulling it out to kind of get us that bean shape, which will just create a more appealing shape for our character's face. So you can go ahead and just move around, just grab these and match the reference. Now my reference is kind of sketchy and hand-drawn, so you'll notice here that it's not perfectly symmetrical. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that I am symmetrizing with one side of the drawing, in this case the right side. Just going to go ahead, add a bit of shape here to the back of the head as well. I'm going to pull out the face a bit and kind of push back in the head just to flatten it a tiny bit. And this will just give us a bit more of an interesting, appealing, and kind of realistic shape. I'm just going to right-click and shade as smooth. Next up, we're going to go ahead and add the ear. So we're going to add another mesh cube there, and I'm going to add a subdivision modifier to this. So I'm just going to go ahead, hit Control-3 to add 3 levels there. Now I'm just going to move this up here into position with the G key. And you see I'm rotating it here. And what we're going to do is try and get that middle line there to kind of match the angle of the ear. That'll just make things a bit easier. I'm going to switch to local mode up here and rotate this a bit around on all the different views. And you can see how I'm trying to get that angle to match the curve of the ear. And that'll make sense in a minute. So now here I'm going to go ahead and grab a Convert to Mesh, which will give us that topology to work with. And then I'm going to go ahead, grab this middle line here with alt-clicking and press V. That'll separate it. And then we can go ahead and grab the second half by pressing L and then X to delete everything. Now we only have half of that cube left. So then now what we can do is go ahead and fill the edge of this ear here and begin working with it. So I'm going to alt-click this edge here and hit F. Now I'm going to hit Control-B and add a bit of bevel there to give it a shape. I rotate up on the middle mouse wheel here to add an extra edge. So now you can see that we're getting somewhat of an ear shape. So I'm going to begin kind of rotating this into spot here, and then we're just going to sculpt it a bit more. So I'm going to go ahead here, rotate this into spot, and begin sculpting it here. Now I'll switch to sculpt mode and begin moving this around to match the ear. So we'll go to sculpt and use that grab brush yet again, just to move that there. So we'll just move this until it matches our sketch a bit. Now we're going to go through and clean up the topology of this ear in 1 second, but let's just go ahead and get this into a good little shape like that. Now we don't want this big flat face. As you see, it's giving us a normal issue. So tab into edit mode, alt-click that face there, delete that face, alt-click this edge loop, and search for grid fill. And that'll give us a kind of proper topology there in the middle of the ear that we can work with. Now let's go ahead and apply a subdivision modifier here, and we're going to lower that to 1 and then just apply that division. Give us a bit more topology. Great, so now let's go ahead and mirror this ear. So we're going to need to apply the location. So if you go ahead and put Control A and hit location, that'll center that origin there. Then we can go ahead and go to mirror modifier, and you see it's not working because we need to do the same for the rotation scale. So hit Control A, rotation scale, and it'll pop into place. Next up, let's go ahead and do the scarf here. So we'll add another cube there, and we're just going to go ahead and apply a subdivision of 2. So hit Control 2. We'll move this up into position here. I'm going to center that horizontal line there, and I'm actually going to add one more subdivision, so I'll bump that up to 3 just by hitting Control 3. Now here in edit mode, you can come up here to the top and turn on this X-ray mode, which will work kind of like wireframe mode, but it gives a bit more visibility. And we can bring those top and bottom vertices in so they kind of match the height of the bottom of the scarf. Now with Control R, we'll click there in the center, and that'll give us a center line to work with. Now we can go ahead, grab everything, just scale it in so it matches the size a bit there. I'm going to turn this on the modifier so I can see a bit more how it's affecting the shape. Perfect. Now what we're going to do is turn off this X-ray mode, go ahead, alt-click this center line, and hit Control B. And that's going to bevel. If you don't see that middle line, then go ahead and hit up on your mouse wheel. And that'll give us a middle line there. And we can grab that middle line and hit Alt-S and scale that in. And can see how we're starting to get that scarf shape. So next up, we'll go ahead, grab these top and bottoms in the wireframe view here and hit Control B. And you can see now we're starting to get that scarf shape. Now roll up and down on the mouse wheel to add as many segments as you want. I'm just going to do 1 or 2. Great. Now next, what we're going to do is end up converting this to a mesh and then sculpting it. But first, let's make sure that it's fitting our head here. I'm going to turn off X-ray mode and go ahead and scale this in on the side view, just so that we know everything's kind of fitting around the base of that neck and more of a circular pattern. Now, what I'm going to do next is convert this mesh, so just convert to mesh, and now we have a mesh. It's a bit heavy in topology, but it'll work. And we'll switch to our grab brush and sculpt mode again, and just kind of move this around here to the edges so that it kind of pulls up to the face and gives it that kind of natural look as if it's resting on their shoulders a bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and adjust this around a tiny bit in all the different views. Next up, let's go ahead and do the body. So as you guessed it, we're going to add another cube with a subdivision modifier. So go ahead, hit Control 3, give us just a bit of geometry to play with there. And I'm going to go ahead and move this up on the Z-axis a bit and try and get this to be the length of the body. So what I'm going to do is switch into edit mode here, turn on the X-ray mode so I can grab front and back there, scale in this top a bit, scale out this bottom a tiny bit here and bring that up. I'm going to Control R, add an edge loop and bring that down to the bottom. That's going to flatten out the bottom for us. And then just go ahead and scale this in until it kind of matches the general size of the photo. Again, I'm just going to keep tweaking the top here until we get this kind of about where we want. Make sure you're paying attention to the side view as well. Now what we're going to do is switch back out to object mode. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this and rotate it just a tiny bit so it kind of leans forward like a little body there. I'm going to convert that to mesh first though. So let's convert that to mesh here. Rotate this forward just a tiny bit. And then now we're going to do our switch back to the sculpt mode with the grab brush, and we're going to go ahead and just adjust this a bit. So I'm going to just tweak this in the viewports until I get something I'm happy with. Just pull that back just a tiny bit. Perfect. Now let's go ahead, switch to sculpt mode with the grab brush and just begin pulling it out. I'm going to add a little bit to the front here so it looks like they have a tiny bit of a tummy. Perfect. Then I'm going to grab the lower back and pull that in just a tiny bit and pull out the rear there to give it a bit of shape. Perfect. Now I'm just going to look around here in the viewport, make sure everything looks good. All right, next up here, let's go ahead and do the nose. Again, we will add yet another cube and we're going to subdivide it. This time, let's do less subdivisions, just one, because it's going to be so small we don't want a ton of topology. Snap here into our edit mode with the X-ray on. We're going to go ahead and just scale the top out a bit and the bottom in. And then we'll grab those top vertices and just bring them down. You can see now here we have a little nose shape. So let's go ahead, grab this here, move it into position over the face. And then I'm going to go ahead, scale it way down. And we're going to bring that forward here on the Y-axis so it pops out the front of the face. And we'll rotate it just a tiny bit. So let's go ahead, bring this forward. I'm going to scale it in a bit so it's not so long. Bring that in there. And I'm going to rotate this to kind of match the angle of the nose. And I'm going to delete these back vertices as well. So let's go ahead, move that back, and then just rotate that. And we'll go ahead and shade smooth and apply our subdivision. Next up here, let's go ahead and add the leg. Again, we will add another cube here. Hit Control 2 for 2 subdivisions on this one. And then we're just going to go ahead and kind of get this into position. So I'm going to scale this down a bit and start kind of here at the ball of the foot. Drag this out, make it just match the bottom size of the foot there. I'm going to tab into edit mode here, wireframe, grab these top vertices, bring these up to top of where I think the leg should start inside of the body, scale that out a bit to give us that kind of top of the thigh there. We'll add Control R for an edge loop there and bring that down just to flatten out the bottom of the foot. Perfect. Now with that, we can go ahead and just begin kind of scaling this into position. I'm going to go ahead and move this foot down just a tiny bit more and move this up. So just tweak this until you're happy with the look of it. But generally want to kind of bring this right corner up here to make it look like it's blending into the body a bit more naturally. Perfect. I'm going to bring in these feet and this ankle just a tiny bit more. I'm going to switch here on the edit modifier so I can see what I'm doing, and then convert this to mesh. Then we can go ahead and add a mirror modifier. I'm going to just go ahead and then apply our location. And there we go. Next up, we're going to go ahead and do the collar. So let's go ahead, add a curve circle here. And then I'm going to / so that I can just isolate this curve. I'm going to add a plane. And then we're going to tab into edit mode here, grab these top 2 vertices, and we're going to search for merge at center. That's going to turn it into a triangle. Then we're going to go ahead and grab that triangle and move it up 1 meter on the y-axis, which will snap it to the bottom of the origin. Now we're going to add an array to that triangle, and then we're also going to add a curve modifier. Select that Bezier curve there, and then now what we can do is scale that triangle with the triangle selected, and you'll see that that will change its approach there. Be careful not to move the triangle, just scale it. If you turn up the count there, you'll see that we are able to kind of fill out that collar. But let's go ahead and get this in position on our character. So you're going to want to grab the triangle here and parent it to the circle. And then that way, when we grab the circle, we can move it around and the triangle will follow without breaking. So do not forget to do that step. So here we go. Let's go ahead, parent there, and just keep transformation. Great. Now we can grab the circle and position this and move it around. So let's go ahead, bring this up to the neck here. And then we can begin kind of scaling and putting this into place. And we can also change this in edit mode. So I'm going to start by just kind of scaling it so it fits around the neck. Perfect. Great. Let's just keep adjusting this a bit till it's right in there. And we can adjust all of this. It's kind of a procedural modeling technique. So don't worry if your size feels off. We can tab into edit mode there and just begin moving these vertices until they kind of fit in place. So move those around until you're happy on how it fits your neck. I think right now this is close enough, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of move on from here with just a few more adjustments. Great. So now what we can go ahead and do is begin adjusting the size of these triangles and the angles. So if you grab all the points and hit Control-T, you can control the tilt. So you can see by grabbing all those points and hitting Control-T, I can move my mouse back and forth and tilt all those so they're kind of hanging down. Now let's go ahead and adjust the count of these triangles. You do that with the triangle selected, and then you can scale up and down on the triangle so that it kind of fits into position. So I want these to be a bit bigger, and then I'll just lower the count. And this is just kind of a little back and forth game of kind of figuring out what size you want the triangle to be. I'm going to do mine around 11 or 12 triangles and scale that to fit. Perfect. Now I'm going to add the solidify modifier to that triangle and make that a little bit bigger there to give it some weight there. Perfect. Now what we can do is go ahead and grab this triangle here and convert it to mesh. And then we can hit Alt-P, clear parent, and keep transformation. And then let's go ahead and also add a bevel on this just to give it a little bit more detail and interest. Add a small bevel there. You can adjust that amount into something you're happy with, and then go ahead and apply that bevel modifier at the end so you have your mesh again. All right, just like that. Perfect. Next up, let's do the arms, add another mesh cube, and we'll go ahead and add a subdivision modifier with Control-2. That'll give us 2 subdivisions. Now what I'm going to do is convert that to a mesh right away. And I'm going to tab into edit mode view and wireframe view, grab everything on the right side here and just delete those vertices. Now we can rotate this around that origin point. I'm going to grab that edge loop there and just go ahead and hit F to fill it. Now let's rotate this into spot here. And we're trying to match the angle of our shoulder here. So you can kind of see how we're just getting that into position. So I'm just going to keep rotating that till it's just right. Perfect. Great. Now what we're going to do is extrude from this to create the arm. So if you didn't do before, you can do it now. Hit Alt Control on that loop and that'll select that whole loop and press F and then you will make a face. Now press I and hit Control. And what that's doing is kind of scaling in there on an inset. So then after you've done that, go ahead, press E, and it should lock to the Z axis there, and you can pull that out. And then I'm going to hit Control B to bevel the end. Great. Now I'm going to hit Control R and roll up on my mouse wheel just to add a little bit of subdivision there in case you want to rig it. Now we're going to go ahead, hit Control B on the edge loop there and just add a bit of shape there. Now let's go ahead and add a hand. So we'll go ahead, add another cube. I'm going to hit Control 2 there and then just squish this down. I'm just going to create a small sphere for the hand, bring it in a bit on the Y so you can see how we kind of have like an oval sphere shape there. I'm just going to scale this, rotate this into spot. Perfect. And then we'll go ahead and convert this hand to a mesh and join it to the arm so that we can then mirror it. So now we'll go ahead, convert that to a mesh, hit the arm, Control J, and then we'll apply that location and then add a mirror modifier like we've been doing to get it mirrored on both sides. Great, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go ahead and work on this pouch. So we're just gonna go ahead, add a cube here, and then we can scale this down on the Y-axis, and then we'll also scale it down on the Z-axis as well. Now I'll just scale it down overall, and then we can begin kind of rotating this and putting it in space. So make sure you just have multiple views open. The top view, for example, get it around maybe a 60-degree angle or so, and then just moving this out so it's kind of on the edge of the belt. Now I like to just turn on the rotate gizmo here, and then just kind of mess around in the viewport until I get an angle that I am happy with. Perfect. Now we're going to want to add a bevel to this as too, just to add some shape. So I'm going to apply the scale with Control A, scale, and then I'm going to add a bevel and then just add a few segments and kind of play with the amount until I get something I'm happy with. I kind of want slightly sharper edges, so I'm going to keep it a small bevel. And then I'm going to shade smooth. All right, next up, let's create the sword. We'll start with a cube here, and we're just going to move this off to the side so we can see what we're doing. Scale this down here, and we'll just make this really small cube and then scale it out on the x-axis. So we'll go ahead here, add another cube, and we'll scale that in, bring it onto the side, hit Control 3, and now we have kind of like a little ball for the hilt there. I'm just going to move this into position. Then I'm going to go ahead and add a mirror modifier. Now with the mirror modifier, I'm going to grab that initial cube, and that'll bring it to the other side. Great. Now what we can do is go ahead here, and we can duplicate this and hit Shift D, rotate it 90 degrees and bring it down. And this will give us kind of our handle. Perfect. Now I want to round out this handle a bit. So first what I'm going to do is come here into wireframe mode, bring out the top and bring out the bottom just to give us a bit more. Now initially I was going to do some edge loops, but let's maybe just add a subdivision instead. So let's go ahead here. And with this hilt selected, let's apply this scale here at the top. And for this one, we'll add a bevel. Go ahead and adjust that until something you're happy with. I'm going to keep it pretty small because I want this still to kind of look square and sharp. And then for these balls here, I'm just going to bring them in a bit to match that hilt since we lost a bit of size there. And for this bottom handle, let's go ahead and add a subdivision of 1 or 2 subdivisions. And then we'll tab back into edit mode. We'll delete that top face and that'll prevent it from rounding out. And then up here in the front mode, what we'll do is we'll go ahead here and we'll add Control R and bring that edge loop down, which will flatten out the handle a bit. You can go ahead, add one here in the center too for just a bit of extra topology. And with that, we kind of have our hilt. Let's go ahead, grab one of those balls there, duplicate that, and we'll remove the mirror modifier and bring that to the bottom here. I'm going to scale that up just a tiny bit so it's just a bit more visually interesting. Perfect. So let's grab everything here. And we're going to search for convert to mesh, convert that to mesh, hit Control J on one object, and then right click and smooth, and that'll give us one hilt. Now let's add another cube, and we'll use this cube for the blade. So I'm just going to go ahead, scale this down in spot here. And right now what you're trying to do is set the width of the blade. Now I'm going to do selection to active, and I just hit Shift S for that, and that will snap it to the center of this hilt that we just made. So great. Let's go ahead, tab into edit mode here. And we'll just scale this down on the Y-axis, and what we're doing here is thinning out the blade. And next what we're going to do is snap here in the front view, and we're going to switch to a wireframe mode, and grab these vertices here, and now what you want to do is kind of pick the height of your blade. Perfect. That's about what I want. Now if you want, you can begin adjusting the shape here. I think I'm going to adjust mine a bit later. So first let's just hit Control R, scroll up on the mouse wheel, add a couple subdivisions there. Grab these top few vertices in wireframe mode and merge at center. And that'll give us a point at the top. Now we're going to use the knife tool. So you can press K for the knife tool or select it on the left side. select that top vert, and we're going to drag it down the center. And now if you hit C and A, that'll cut through and also snap it to an angle. So now you can see that I have that line on both sides. So Alt click that line, which will grab the entire edge loop there. Hit Control B and make sure you have one subdivision by using the mouse wheel. Then Alt click that one and then scale in on Y. And you can see that now we have a indent on our sword, kind of giving it that traditional medieval look. Now back in edit mode here, I'm going to grab this bottom one. And what I want to do is scale it in so the bottom's a little bit thinner just for a bit of style. So we're going to grab this proportional editing up here. And you can scroll up and down on the mouse wheel to see where it affects. And by scaling that down, you'll see how it's kind of giving us a gradual fall off. And with that, we're kind of getting a unique sword shape. And then we can go ahead and just join everything here and make sure everything looks as we want. Now that we have that done, let's go ahead, grab that sword and just rotate it. And we're just going to move that behind our character. Of course, you can play with the position and scale how you want. I'm just going to go ahead and make sure mine's visible from the front here. Now this next part might be hard for a bit beginner, so pay attention to the shortcuts at the bottom. We're going to tab into edit mode on the body here and create a belt. So grab the edge loop here by alt clicking and tap G twice and you can move it up and down. So we want one at the top, center, and the bottom to create a shape for a belt. Now we'll switch back to face mode, hit alt click on the edge there to grab those loops, hit Shift D to duplicate that selection, and then P selection to create a new object. Now we have a new object, which is the belt, and we can begin messing with that. So what I'm going to do is switch back out to object mode, grab the belt here, and we can grab a solidify modifier and begin thickening that up. And if you set it to a negative value there, it'll kind of pop outwards and we'll get a bit of a shape for our belt. Perfect. Now we can add a bevel modifier. And if your bevel doesn't look right, always make sure you have your scale applied. I'm just going to add a few edge loops there and adjust the amount until I get something I'm happy with. Now let's add that belt buckle. So we'll tab into the belt object here. And it may be difficult to see with the solidify modifier. So you can go ahead and turn off those modifiers while you're working. In face select mode, let's grab these faces here around the belt. Now what we can do is hit Shift D to duplicate those. And then make sure you have proportional editing off from earlier. You can see how I've left that on. So let's go ahead and click that off. And then we can scale up that new selection there. Just get that into the shape of the belt buckle. Now with all those faces selected, press I and bring that in just a bit and then delete those faces. And then now when we turn our modifiers back on, we should have like a little belt buckle. But for that to be visible, we're going to go ahead and select that. So if I just hover over that new selection and press L in edit mode and bring that forward on the Y there, that'll just pop it out a bit so that you can see. And if we turn our modifiers back on, you can see that now we have a belt. Next up, we're going to go ahead and add some shape to the clothes. So let's grab the leg here, switch into wireframe mode. I'm going to go ahead, grab this top view here. And if I press I and Control and drag, we can go ahead and drag that out. And by doing that, you see we get a little pants edge. You can also switch back in here to edge mode, grab this edge loop here, and if you want, add a bevel, and that'll just help kind of smooth it out and give yourself a little bit more detail. Now let's go ahead and create some body detail. So we'll go ahead, grab this body, switch to edge mode there, and I'm going to go ahead and alt click these edge loops here on the sides. Sometimes it can be a bit finicky. As you see, I'm grabbing the wrong side. So just kind of click until you get it right there. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and grab 4 rows here in the center. Now I don't want this going around the entire body because I want it to look like they're wearing a coat. So we're going to go ahead and deselect these. So I'm going to press C to switch to the selection tool. And by dragging with the middle mouse button, I can deselect faces. To make sure you see things easier, tap /, and that'll just kind of make it so that you isolate the selected object. And then when you're done, tap / again, and it'll go out. Once you've got your selection, hit I, Control, and drag in a bit. And you can see there how we get that inset. Then you can switch back to edge loop here. And we're going to go ahead and grab all these edge loops around here. And then hit Control B. And that's just going to give us a little edge there. Great. So with that, when you snap back out, hit /, you'll see everything again. You'll see that because we have those bevels there, it holds it. So I'm going to turn off the reference photo here. And what we can do is start applying the modifiers or select everything and convert to mesh, and that'll just kind of do it all at once, and hit Control J. Now we have one object. I'm going to name this cat, and I wanted to keep the sword separate, so I'm going to do swords. You can put those in one if you want. We'll grab the cat here, and what we're going to do is go ahead and add a new material over here in the shader panel, call that cat, a new material over here, and call that sword. So now we can kind of move on to kind of the coloring and texturing process. We'll go ahead here on the cat and drag out this node here and search for an image texture. Now this is the only part that won't be 100% real time. The actual process of just painting in all the colors takes hours and experimentation, but don't worry. I'm going to show you how to UV unwrap it, and then I'm going to show you the tools you need to paint it, and then you can go ahead and begin painting it yourself. As a reminder, I added a free material as well so that you can follow along with this type of fabric texture, and I'll tell you how to use that. So let's kind of dive in and start looking at the tools we need to texture. Now what we're going to do is up here in the image editor window, we'll go ahead, pull up our reference. Down here in the image texture, we'll grab that paint picker and pull colors from our reference, and I'm just going to call this cat base. Then I'm also going to change the width and height here to a 4K texture. If your computer can handle that, I recommend that. So let's UV unwrap next. We'll grab our object here, and I'm going to tab into edit mode. And honestly, we don't need to do fancy unwrapping for this. We'll just go ahead, select everything, hit U, Smart UV Project. Let's just bump that island margin up just to avoid some overlaps and leave the rest at default. Now over here in the UV window, we can press A to select everything and search for pack. And then we'll just leave that at default settings, and that's just going to pack that to be a bit more efficient use of our UV islands. Great. Now if we switch to texture paint mode, we should see that kind of base color we have from our image there. And what we can do is go ahead and begin kind of painting with the colors. So I'm going to keep pulling colors from my reference image. So up here you have the two colors, so go ahead, just grab that eyedropper and pull that there. Now, if you pull open the in panel in the tools section there, come down here to the fall off, I like to work with this setting right here, and that gives me kind of a harsh edge, which for this style is what I want. And I can begin kind of painting there as well and creating my eye layer. So you can see how simple this is. Perfect. Now, if you want to swap between colors, you can go ahead, grab the second color, and then press X and swap between them. So then now I can go ahead and switch back here and begin painting in kind of the pupil for the eyes as well. Perfect. Now down here, you'll notice we have the symmetry. You can turn that on and off depending on what you're doing. But here you can see I begun blocking out all the colors. So let me show you here how to use the fabric texture. Now, if you downloaded that free sample pack, you can go ahead, create a new slot over here, and then just drag that in there. What that does is just pull it into our scene. So we have that group there. Now come into your material here. And what you can do is add search, look for group, add that fabric cotton there, and you can plug in your painted texture here to the colors. And then what we're going to do is we can delete that BSDF node and move that over here. And then what we can do is drag this mapping node out, search for a vector. And we'll drag that vector node out and search for a texture generated coordinate. Perfect. Now I'm going to switch to rendered view. And you can see here that we're getting that fabric texture. And you can go ahead and rotate that texture around to try and avoid getting that circular motion on the front of the face. You can leave it at generated, set it to object, set it to camera view, kind of play depending on how your UV unwrap and model topology looks. So over here, I'm just going to leave mine to camera, and that'll kind of prevent that there. And with that, you can kind of get that fabric texture look while just painting in your base color. So that's kind of a simple way to get some stylized there. Now, if you're playing with the sword, do remember that you do have the metallic section. So I recommend only making the hilt and the balls there metallic. Now, in regards to the stitches, you can download this free texture here from the ZBrush library and use it in Blender. So once you download that texture, come over here under your paintbrush texture and just add it there under the texture section as an image texture, and then you can paint in the different stitches.